right, howdy folks. Time for another, I guess, development stream. It's kind of more of an update, kind of talking about some things that I've been doing. It's been a while since I made a video about the game, but today we're going to be talking about a couple things, mainly the field sim, environments, animation, and a little bit as to why I ended up choosing 3D players over 2D players ultimately. Let's just make sure that I'm not talking to no one. Make sure Restream's telling me that we're online. Let's see. Yep, we're online. All right, so just a quick update about the field sim. I spent a lot of time on that. The field sim, the way that's going to end up working is every game is going to be simulated play by play in code. And there's about a little over 1,000 lines of code here. And that's just for the game logic. The actual like play by play logic is probably around another 1,300 or so. So lots of code. The way it's going to end up working is that it's going to, take the two teams and simulate a game and get a result for each and every single play. And the game will then store the results of each and every play. It's going to store the teams, what formation they were in, what players were in on the play, the clock, the time of day, all that stuff. And then whenever you want to see the actual results of the play on the field, there's going to be a separate engine. It's going to be the animation engine, and it's going to basically load up everything the way it was stored, and then it's going to kind of elaborate a little bit on the results of the play, and then create an outcome on the field that is then animated and you can see it. And the goal of it is for it to be as indistinguishable from a real-time engine as possible. That's going to be challenging because it's not going to be your typical real-time engine like a 2K or a Game Day or Quarterback Club or whatever. The reason for that is because mostly because I didn't want I wanted to get good outcomes first and then build an animation on top of that. And what I mean by that is if you take any conventional football game, on any given play you have I don't know, maybe a dozen or so different systems that could fail, right? You have your offensive and defensive line interactions, you have wide receivers and defensive backs, you have the actual, the rules of the game, you have zone coverage and man coverage and other types of AI systems, and all those things need to stay working as intended all the time to prevent game-breaking bugs. And in my estimation, if I don't have a big budget or like a team of people, I don't feel confident that I can make a good enough engine that's real-time to prevent those game-breaking bugs. And so instead, I want to get solid outcome, you know, your mathematical probabilities, get those solid first, and then build a visual representation after that. Now, I know it's not as dynamic as a real-time engine, but I think for what I have and for what I'm going to be able to do, I think that's going to be probably the best solution starting out. Now, it doesn't mean that later on, as the project grows, hopefully, that there won't be a sort of graduation to a real-time engine or something like a hybrid or something. I don't know. That's certainly a possibility. But for now, I think this is the quickest solution to get good outcomes and also get some kind of visual representation that is interesting. So that's kind of where the field sim is. Last time I tested it, the field sim seems to be generating good outcomes. Still have to kind of work on the actual stat generation and certain things. All stats are generated off of play outcomes, but there's still some numbers that I need to tweak to get some things like pass attempts higher and pass completions and all that stuff. That's still a system that needs to be refined, but it seems to be working. And it takes probably about, I think I've been using 32 high school teams. So it's going to be, if I had to guess, it'd probably be around 5-ish minutes for high school, college, and professional games to all be simulated at one instance. And that's probably a little bit too much time. It's not egregious, but I think if I simulate every game by quarter along with the user game, I think that's going to end up being a good solution to kind of cut down on the amount of time you have to just sit there and wait. So that is everything that I think I wanted to say about the field sim. Let me just make sure that, let me check on my live stream link, make sure that's working, make sure it's not private. Looks to be public. All right. Okay, so let's move on to environments. So obviously this is Stadium, and I had to take a few days to kind of learn a little bit about Blender, just to make like basic geometry and to learn how to manipulate the shapes and get the angles and make everything line up. But what this is, it's a pretty simple setup. It's just different pieces that I ended up making. So for example, this is a corner piece with the entrance. There's also a corner piece without the entrance. There's a regular straight section. I do have straight sections with entrances as well, but none of them are currently in the scene. And then there's a second deck, which is at a slightly different angle. And it also has some cutouts here for the entrances. Now they're not very detailed, but you're not really supposed to see it from super close. So from far away, I think it looks pretty good. And I added some strut textures just to look like, I didn't want to have a ton of geometry, so I just wanted to kind of give the impression that there's some structure back there, but it's basically just like a prism shape, like a block. And then we have some more blocks here to kind of represent the ramps that go up into the higher sections. We have some textures on the back side, just to kind of give the impression of some depth, even though it's completely flat. And these assets, of course, are not final. I just needed something to work with at the beginning. Do have the press box here. Now, I want a completely modular system to where every kind of stadium set has its own look. And that way you can kind of, or I can, go in and build stadiums the way I need to. Got the lights here. These lights are part of the press box block. We have some detail here underneath the press box. The lights do have a rear to them, so it's not a one-sided plane. And it's just the same image, I just kind of darkened it a little bit. Now, the reason that I need the stadium to look decent from all around is because eventually in the broadcast cutscenes, I want there to be aerial views of the stadium. You guys know what I'm talking about. Aerial views, nighttime shots, all that stuff. And I want it to look good from a distance and relatively good up close. So that's why I wanted it to look presentable from all angles. The back here doesn't look great, but that's where it is right now. And I think the width of these kind of seating rows, I'm not sure if that's a good number. There's about 4 per section, so it's 8 total, or there's 8 faces here that all have the same texture. Again, it looks all right, just at a glance. Eventually, I'll want it to be a little bit more refined. For now, that's totally fine. The edges are completely flat. I don't think I want to have any geometry, or at least not a lot, to take up resources as far as like the actual rows, the bleachers. We do have the screen here. That was made with photos. All the textures here were made with photos. And the colors were kind of crunched down to be like 32-bit or 64-bit, something like that. Or like 64 colors or 34 colors or 32 colors. And later on I can render some screens on here, like some text that animates, and the 2 team names, the time left, and maybe some advertisements or whatever. But basically my goal was to have, my initial goal was to have like PS1 style environments. And at a glance, this does kind of look a little bit like PS1. This is obviously higher resolution than the PlayStation. But then I started looking at the Nintendo 64, and I liked the clarity of the N64 a little bit more than sort of the fuzziness of the PS1. I think that's kind of what I'm going for now, is like sort of an HD N64 kind of look. And I think I've achieved part of that with the simple geometry and putting all the details in the textures. I think it kind of conveys that a little bit. And then I don't have to worry about achieving like the warble effect that you'd see with the PS1 models. I never really liked that. Some people try to emulate that, but I never liked it, so I'm just gonna leave that out. The field proportions I think are close, but it still looks a little bit off to me. The player relative to the field, at least yard-wise, I think is correct. 3 yards is roughly 6 feet, and so, or 2 yards is roughly 6 feet. So this player fits in these 3 lines right here, 1, 2, 3. So that's 2 yards. So lengthwise, I think it's correct. Some of it just looks a little bit, gets too small or something. This field texture I did not make. I actually had someone make a couple stadium assets that were a lot more reminiscent of the PS1 that I did not end up using except for the field texture. There's still some issues with the UVs and the texture, because you can see this is part of a line of a tile that's used in other places. So this whole field texture I'm probably going to replace, but it works for now. The proportions look good at a glance, but when you look at it more, you start to question it. I also made these uprights. They're not like perfect circles, or they're kind of, they have flat edges just to preserve the geometry use. But at a glance, you know, it kind of achieves the same look. I did make these to proportion according to this player, so you know, I forgot the dimensions off the top of my head, but the uprights are so far off the ground. These poles are a certain length, certain width, all that stuff. Let's see what else. Overall, I think it turned out pretty well. And even with the modular set that I did make, I can make a number of different looking stadiums. Like I can make like a shoe horse, a horseshoe kind of look. I can take this section off. I can take this, you know, the second deck off. There's no third deck in this set. I guess I could just stack another second one on top, but it might look a little weird. I can remove the press box. I can have a shorter one, a wider one. I can have more of these field lights. I can put them, you know, on the rim of the stadium. I can take the corners off. So that's just the straight angles. There's a lot of things I can do with the set that I do have, but obviously later on I want to make a lot more, so I can make the college and pro stadiums have a little bit more of a unique character to them, and be a little bit more detailed and interesting. I do have I have this sky shader. So the clouds are actually moving. The speed is set to pretty low right now, but I can make it very cloudy. I can make it a completely clear day. I can change the size of the sun. I can switch it to nighttime. So there's a lot of control over the sky. So that'll be a cool detail to see later on with like weather effects and that sort of thing. But what I wanted to achieve was as compelling of an environment as I can make within the sort of HD N64 kind of look. So there is a slight amount of atmospheric fog, which I don't think was available on the N64, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe they did have it, I'm not sure. But the point is that, you know, we have modern lighting effects, you know, stuff that can be done in modern game engines, but it still has sort of a grounding in an older aesthetic. So it looks pretty basic right now. You know, it's a clear day. There's no surrounding. You know, it's not in the middle of a town or anything. Later on, there's going to be, you know, stuff all around the stadium, and the lighting is going to be appropriate and all that stuff. Because I want to have cutscenes for the broadcast, you know, to have shots like this with the fans. And we're going to get to the fans in a second, so stick around for that. You know, with the graphical overlays of the team names and the scores and the records and all that. So the environments are very important. If I have like really compelling environments and sort of a tolerable on-field animation system, I think I'd be okay with that starting out. What I didn't want is for the environments to be really poor, because I really want that. I want you to believe in the game world, and so the better the environments look within a certain design aesthetic, I think the better. So that's kind of where the environments are. We'll move to animations next. Now, originally I planned for this whole game to be 2D. As I looked at games like NCAA 98 and NBA 96 on the PS1, I really liked the 3D environments with the 2D players, and so I kind of expanded the scope to that. And it wouldn't have been that much different of logic, because the logic for the field would still take place on sort of a two-dimensional grid. I didn't have to worry about going up and down. So the logic was still going to be the same for the field. But then I thought about how much detail I actually wanted to be present in the player models themselves. Because one of the design principles for the players that I'm following is player identity. And so I didn't want all the players to kind of just look the same from, you know, the perspective on the field. And so I thought, well, I can have, you know, different player sprites and different player sprite sizes. I can have details on the sprites. So that was the solution to that. But the problem was that if you have more and more details on a 2D sprite that are variable, you have to go in and edit hundreds and hundreds of animation frames, especially if you want it to look smooth, if you want to have a lot of details. And I didn't want to do that. And I also thought about just the amount of skill it takes to make 2D sprites look good. I didn't want to have, you know, tiny sprites. I wanted to have, you know, at least 64 by 64 player sprites. Ideally something closer to 96 by 96. And I am skilled in drawing, but not to the level of being able to animate stuff, you know, because I would have had to animate those drawings, and it would have just been a lot of extra work. And then to expand on that later would have been even more work, because you have to go in and edit all those frames again later. So I thought, well, I don't have the skill to make it look good. I don't have the time, because I don't want it to take forever. I don't have the time to make all those animations. And I want it to be more detailed. And so for all those reasons, I ended up considering 3D players more and more. And then I looked at what assets were available as far as 3D animation already, and I knew there was a fair amount. And it just became more and more appealing just to go to 3D players and to stick to sort of a PS1 or N64 look for the players. And so that's what I ended up doing. My biggest fear, though, was that it was going to end up looking too realistic, and it was going to cross into that threshold of, you know, modern AAA game, and I don't want it to be that way. This is a game that's grounded in an older aesthetic, and I wanted to keep that. But even in that older aesthetic, doesn't mean that it has to be 2D pixel art, as much as I like 2D pixel art. And so I thought that if I stuck to a sort of PS1 or N64 animation system, I think it would be different enough to where that wouldn't be as much of a problem. Let me check my resolution real quick. It looks like it's kind of low. I'm not sure. I think it looks okay. We're at 720, which is probably all right. So, that's what I ended up going with. This specific player model, I did not make myself. I commissioned this from an artist, and I think he did a pretty good job. The only problem is the face. Not because the face isn't good, is because I want to have the faces match the player avatars. And so, if you remember what the player avatars look like, see if I can pull up an image real quick. I'll just grab something from the Discord. Should be okay. Here we go. So you can see that. So this image here, you can see that's the face. It's obviously 2D. It's has a lot of contrast. Almost looks cartoony. So if you can imagine that plastered onto the face, I'm not exactly sure how that's gonna look or work. I can obviously turn off like the hair and the shoulders and everything just to get the head, the face. If that doesn't end up working, may end up needing to have the same kind of system that I do for the player avatars, but for the face, like have different eyes and noses, and then just import that into the UI to where you see faces that look more like this. I do like the other faces a lot, but even if I had to switch to something that was more like this, as long as it had a lot of variation, I think it would be acceptable. But I don't know how that's going to work out just yet. But you can see on the textures, the geometry is simple. The detail is pretty nice. Let me go to the actual scene here. And stuff like the armbands, that's its own texture, so I can either draw stuff on or use like dynamic shapes, or have different texture layers that are turned on and off for equipment and that sort of thing. The names will probably end up being their own piece of geometry that is rendered close to the model. That way they're not a part of the texture. So I think overall the models look pretty good. They do have a distinct look to them. They're obviously not photorealistic, which is good. The animations though are pretty smooth, and I actually like that sort of more contemporary animation look on an older looking model. Has an interesting look to it. So we made a blend space. It actually took a while to get these animations to work on this model, because the animations were already made, and I had this model, and it took a bit. It took a while of trial and error to get the animations to map correctly onto this model, but it finally ended up working. And so we have a few animations baked in here. Let's go to this. So this is the blend space. If you don't know what a blend space is, it's just taking two animations and blending them together. So it's like creating a dynamic transition that you don't have to manually do, which is a nice piece of technology that saves a lot of time, and it makes it look pretty nice. We currently have the active idle animation set as the center. So there's another idle animation, but I kind of like this one more, but we'll see. So we have idle first, and then once you start moving up and adding more motion to the character, they start transitioning into the walking animation. And this is a walking animation. And so these are two distinct animations, but because of the blend space, the 2D blend space, it blends them together. So there's these sort of intermediate animations that we didn't have to implement at all, which ideally will make the motion look pretty smooth. And then we have the running animation. Now, the blend space kind of fails a little bit at certain points. I think it might be because the running animation kind of runs faster. But it doesn't look too bad, even if you kind of stutter steps a little bit. Most of the time, you're just going to see the transitions a little bit. And that's really all you need. You're just trying to prevent it from cutting completely to this, which even then doesn't look too bad. But that's also thanks to the blend space here. So we also have going backwards. We have running backwards. We have strafing to the right and to the left. So that should provide pretty good range of motion. Then you have these sort of in-between angles. We straighten him out here a little bit. So this is completely to the front. This is to the left a little bit. As you get to the left, you start transitioning into the strafing animation. And you can kind of see how his legs kind of don't like that a little bit here. It's not that bad. Get the backwards one, which looks pretty nice. And what I was saying earlier about the sort of overall animation style that I was wanting to achieve, I was trying to achieve a sort of ideally like something like Game Day 2005 on the PS1. I'm going to pull up a video of that real quick. so you can see what I'm talking about. Game Day has... They actually don't have a lot of animations. It's pretty simple. And there's not a lot of transitions, which I like. And there's like a total of 2 tackling animations. They have a dive tackle and a wrap tackle. And then they have... I don't know if they have separate animations for falling at different angles and tackling at different angles, but it's all the same animation. So here's Game Day 2005, which is a great game, by the way. So they're running here. Kind of jerky motion. Oh yeah, there's also that standing throwing tackle. So that's a total of 3 actually. I think there's 1 catching animation that also doubles as the DB kind of pass defend attempt. So they reuse as much as they can, which I like. You know, and especially for the time, this game looks very smooth. You know, if I could snap my fingers and get this tomorrow, I think I'd be pretty satisfied. Trying to find some tackles that you can really see. So that was a simple tackle. It was kind of like a tackle to the... I guess if we're behind the player to his bottom right, I guess. And that's, you see that pretty much most of the time. Then you see this kind of being tackled animation. And there's no dynamic limbs, there's none of that. It's just tackled and being tackled, and then the angle of the interaction, and that's it. We have some interplay, some emotes. And the blocking as well. The blocking for the offensive lineman, that animation is the same as the defensive line animation. So they're kind of doing the same battle animation to each other. And then the defensive line has... I think they have one kind of block shed animation, which works fine. You see that tackle animation again. There's a handoff. And this time it's to the bottom left. And this is where I'm not sure if they have just 8 directions for these animations or if they somehow do it dynamically in the engine. I'm not sure. I'll have to do a little more research on that. But the point is that it's only a couple animations. And it looks fine when it's up to speed. And so that's kind of what I'm going for. Obviously, my game's a little bit higher resolution. But I think overall, as long as the animations are linked together well, I think it'll look fine. So we'll look at the animations that are not in the blend space. We have active idle. We have regular idle here. Oh, it's not playing. It's weird. Can we switch him? I guess because he has the this is currently. Let's try this. Okay, there we go. So we have kind of a standing idle. It kind of stretches. You have a jump, like a. This is more of a transition. The engine should be able, the engine should be able to transition from the ground to the air and back. So we only have the sort of intermediate motion. We saw run. That's pretty much it. Do we have run jump? Yeah. We got that. So for the vast majority of animations, I should be able to get animations from the same place I got these. There are a couple that I might need to either make myself or commission this artist to make. Those will probably end up being, let's see. Those will probably end up being possibly tackle and fall at all the different angles if I have to use separate animations, or just the few that I can recycle and change the angles in the engine. Possibly QB throw, and then catch / pass defend. So that is where the animations are. Let's see. Yeah, so that's the animations. Let's look a little bit to the fan section. Now, since I have a field, I obviously need fans, right? Obviously, I can't use 3D models. That's too much geometry. It's also at a place for the aesthetic, I think. So, the way these older games rendered fans was a lot of the time, I think starting on the N64 or starting on the Dreamcast maybe, they started using billboards, like 2D sprites, and then just populate the stadium full of them. But I think on the N64, PS1, and older games, or older consoles, they just used a noise texture or a fan texture. So if you can imagine a texture that kind of looked like the stands were filled, that would be the cheapest option resource-wise. But it doesn't look that great when you can do billboarding, which is what get some images here. These are from NFL 2K5. You can see that here the stadium sections are actually flat. They're just ramps, kind of like mine are. And they just render rows of fans. Now, I don't know if the scale is 1-to-1. Like, I don't know, like, let's say the capacity for this stadium is 50,000. I don't know if they have 50,000 sprites. I don't know if they kind of scale it down a little bit to save on resources and just give an impression. I have a feeling that might be what they're doing. I only wonder because of the performance impact, because all of these sprites are animated. They might do tricks to kind of save on resources somehow, but you can tell that the players are not part of the floor, or the fans are not part of the floor. Let's get another image. Now from the front, if all you had was a flat texture, you know, it would look okay. But from the angles, from the sides, it starts to fail. You can see in this image here how they have the rows. I have a feeling that, because if you look at a real stadium, I think the fans are closer than this. Like it might be like in every space, every gap here, there probably needs to be another row if they're gonna go like a 1-to-1 scale. So they might be only rendering like 50% capacity. I'm not sure. And these are only on the front, so on the back sides, like if you ever watch the intro cutscenes to NFL 2K5, you'll notice that the fans are only one-sided, so if the camera ever kind of gets behind them, the stands look totally empty. Like right here. You can see that these are just ramps or wedges, and that there's no texture on the other side of the plane. You can tell in the background, these are probably not the best images for this, but the backgrounds here are pretty low res. These are probably just textures, not 3D models. So I'm going to have to, you know, put all these kinds of things in the background. That way it doesn't look like you're just playing in a void. Enough to cover and obscure the horizon. There's a lot of nice little details that they put into these stadiums. You can see these are supposed to be cars. The trees are just textures, and I have tree textures. I have building textures. Yeah. So you can see the gaps here as well. So that's kind of what I was looking at for fans. And so I think this will be the last part of this stream. But, whoops. What am I doing? I go here to fan section. This is just a scene that I made to kind of test systems out. Now this is, it's an animated 3D sprite, so it's a flat image. And it's currently using this sprite sheet that I made out of a 3D model in an animation. It's an animation that I reduced to 10 frames because I don't need a bunch of frames. It just needs to kind of denote motion a little bit. And I have different ones. I have like, you know, standing and cheering and clapping and legs crossed and all this stuff. The thing I'm not sure how I'm going to do, or that I haven't done yet, is have different looking spectators. Like maybe, I don't think that they need to look that different. It's just maybe just a little bit of variation. Like not everyone needs to be wearing the same exact colored shirt. That's probably the biggest part, is the shirt. And probably have some people with hair, because this guy's bald. And have a female as well. This is kind of just a test. So I built a system that makes a bunch of these and has a number of different parameters. We're going to go into this scene, and you can see I have a couple of parameters here. I have gap, got rows, so it's 25 rows, 25 columns. I have a taper. The taper doesn't work the best right now, but it's basically to try to make angles like pie, like a pie slice shaped section, like for corners. I haven't gotten that to work well yet. I have a ramp here, so how high the next row is rendered. How much variance is in this gap, and then how dense the crowd is. So we're gonna run this scene. It'll take a bit to load up. One thing that I've noticed is the load times for running has kind of gone up. Once you're in the game, it's pretty nice, but starting out, not so much. Okay, so the density is set to 0.1 right now, so it's about 10%. So let's see how we're gonna do this. Let's move this. Gonna be enough. Go ahead, something like this. I'll do this, just so you can see as much detail as possible. So let's change the density to, let's reset that to 100. So there's 100% density. You can see it's just that same sprite. Just the same people over and over again, which actually looks pretty nice. Some of the sprites are set to randomly flip, so some are facing to the left or to the right. Some are animated faster than others, some are slower. It kind of creates this sort of symphony of motion that at a glance, you know, looks pretty good. I have to cut down on the gap just so that they're not sitting in each other's lap. But if they're close, that's okay, like these guys here. And it's actually two-sided right now, so at a distance, it doesn't look bad at all. I don't know if I'm gonna need this, or probably just like not have the camera show the backs close up, because the close up is just the same guys from the front. It's kind of funny. But you can see with two sides, you kind of, the only way it looks empty is if you're looking straight down the middle of it, and it's only the very center part of where the camera's looking. So it's not that egregious. And actually looks pretty nice. If you imagine if that's a stadium section and the camera's kind of moving around, you might get that little line in the middle. I think that's better than the stadium looking empty from angles farther than like 45 degrees or 90 degrees, whatever, relative to the section. I think that'll be good. And the cool thing about density is that we can change it. So if you can imagine, you know, maybe you're not doing so hot, or maybe the fan base isn't the best, and you know, attendance is only at 50%. Your stands might look a little bit more like this. Or maybe things are looking pretty bad and your fan base is, you know, fickle. Might look something closer to this. And things get really bad, you might be at 10%, 5%, you know, and it's all randomized, so there's variation. Go 0.025%, 0.1%, right? You can be really bad. That's as far as that goes. 0.001. Right. The only thing I'm worried about is kind of back to the scale issue. If this is 25 by 25. Lit J asks, when do you think you'll be done? I ask myself that all the time. My early projections were to begin some kind of beta by the end of the year. For a number of different reasons, like I had to switch to this current game engine, which took a few months, so that kind of delayed things. Having to go 3D probably adds a little bit of work, but not that much, considering the benefit you get to environments and detail and all that. So 3D adds probably a little bit of work, but you get, you know, more interesting looking results. So I was planning on having some kind of closed testing by the end of the year. That probably doesn't mean that there's going to be a finished animation engine. Like at the very worst, it might mean that I have just like the menu stuff in a build that some people can test, and that's probably going to be like, that'll be like the lowest of the bar. I'll have to work on the animation engine. That's going to be really challenging. So that's kind of my early projections. LitJ says, it looks great so far, and take as much time as you need. My original, like, back when I was starting it, like maybe like a year and a half ago, roughly, I wanted to take no more than 2 years to get a working version. I think it's going to be probably a little bit more than that, but I don't want to spend like 5 years and not even have an initial version. Like, even if it's like early access or whatever, or some kind of beta. I want to have something before, you know, the 3-year mark. Because I feel like you can spend a lot of time and it can really get away from you, and then you spend all this time, you know, not monetizing the game, and then you kind of stuck a little bit, and you're kind of upside down, so to speak, because if you spend like 7 years on the game and you only make a couple thousand, you know, that's not the best thing. But I plan for this game to have a long development cycle after its initial release, and hopefully, you know, my resources increase, which will speed up development, and eventually I can hopefully start a studio of some kind. But right now, you know, it's just me. So that's kind of where the timeline is. I'll know more by the end of the year. But this is the fan system as it is now. I was saying that I don't know if this is going to work at a large scale. Like, I have a pretty strong computer, so it'll probably be okay for a computer like this. But I'm planning on this game running on weaker hardware, like laptops, work laptops, that kind of thing. So I think, you know, having, let's see, this is, I guess 625 people right here. So if you can imagine, like if I bump this up, we do 50. Like my computer will probably be fine, but I want this to work on a lot of different computers because this is one of the other principles I'm following is I don't want people to have to buy expensive hardware to play this game. I want this to work on your work laptop. I want this to work on a laptop that you have sitting up in the closet. You know, that's you know, within the last 15 years roughly. And stuff like this, I feel like they should be fine with. You know, the rendering it might take a little bit of time, but once it's there, it might be okay. I'll have to test it. Because we can get pretty ridiculous with it. So it's 100 times 100 now. If I just press the space bar, you're gonna get, you know, that's only 10,000. Kind of like Out of the Park does. And is this Godot or another game? This is Godot. Yeah, this is Godot. I don't know if it's... I hear it's not the most efficient, but as long as I can find a way to make it work. So this is 10,000. You know, some stadiums have, you know, 10 times this. And these are all animating. Another problem. If they were static, it might take a little bit less resources, but still a lot of, you know, a lot of people here. And this, of course, will be spread around an entire stadium. I don't know the distance, if that affects anything. But, so this is still something that I'll have to figure out. That's why I'm kind of wondering if, like, sports games on the Dreamcast and the PS2 and Xbox, if they didn't scale down the number of fans. Like if you can imagine spreading this around an entire stadium and it just looks like it's you know, 50,000, but it's actually 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever. I wonder if they did a little bit of that. Or if it's just, you know, 10,000 or, you know, 1-to-1, 50,000. The only thing I can think of that I could do is like not render these as individual sprites, but make like strips of like, you know, 10 or whatever, make it variable to where it's animating multiple fans on a single sprite and the sprites are just a little bit longer. I don't know if that would be cheaper resource wise. It might be. So that might help get more performance. Maybe not having two sides to the sprite might help. But I really like being able to, at a distance, see the backs of the spectators. That helps a lot. So that might be a thing. Still a lot of variables that I don't know. But the way it actually looks, like they're all running the same animations. And it looks, you know, like they're kind of doing different stuff. They're kind of shuffling around, moving around. I have some animations where they're standing up and fist pumping and clapping and crossing their legs and that kind of thing. And then if you can imagine different shirts, shirt colors, you know, while giving a preference to the the home team's colors. You know, add a female figure in there. That way you get some females in the crowd. That's kind of where the fans are. And so, I mean, I guess, let's see. Might be able to put this on the field just to see how it looks real quick. Fan section. Let's see. We don't want that floor in there, actually. I guess we'll put this... Oh, we can't do that because there's a camera. There'd be two cameras. Crap. Well, let me do this then. Let me get rid of this. And then load that in. We have another camera on this field. Let's try to guesstimate where that would be. Something like that, maybe. Alright. Let's go and load this scene up. I haven't done this yet, so I don't know how it's gonna look. The angles are probably not gonna match. I wish I could just have like a plane that I could just adjust. Maybe I could do it in Blender, I don't know. That might be another way. For my fans. I have no idea. That's weird. Oh. Oh, they're at the origin. Yeah, they're way over there. Let's move them. Put these guys in. There we go. Okay, so they are at the wrong angle here. Need to rotate 90 degrees. God. Not quite. Okay, well, that's a mess, but it's kind of scary looking. Yeah, so we'll have to play with that, but I guess that's the idea. Get my camera back in here. So, I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover. We went over the field sim, the environments, animations, talked about 2D to 3D. So I think, yeah, unless there's any questions, I'd end up wrapping it up here. Looks pretty barren right now, but it'll eventually look better. Interesting lighting. And if this looks familiar at all, it's because I used some images of a stadium that no longer exists, at least not in full. Get the press box and the lights and everything. So, but yeah, unless there's any questions, I think we're going to leave it here. All right, well, thanks to everyone who watched, and I guess we'll be seeing you guys in the next one.